The Bridge of Seasons, A Letter Across Time. After Mass Breakfast. A Place in Time. Created by Red Cardinal Kitchen. All genre writing. Page 1. The bridge between what was and what remains. There are bridges where bodies walk, and bridges where the heart builds in silence. This story begins on one such bridge, not of iron or stone, but of seasons joined by memory. Beneath it runs the slow river of days, carrying laughter and loss alike, each reflection shimmering with the same light, though the faces it holds have changed. Page 2. Once, the table was full, plates clattered, chairs scraped, the small symphony of a house alive. But time, that patient craftsman, began its quiet work, carving space between voices, thinning the air until only two remained at its center. It was not an ending then, only a changing, a new rhythm set to the same old heartbeat. Page 3. In the space between breakfasts and blessings, between a husband's steady hand and a wife's gentle ritual, we learn that love does not vanish when it is tested by quiet. It deepens. It folds itself into gestures, the pouring of cream, the slicing of toast, the keeping of a chair unclaimed but never forgotten. And so begins the Bridge of Seasons. Part 2. After Mass Breakfast, A Place in Time. It is not merely a story of loss, but of continuance, of how two people cross from one life to another without leaving the first behind. Here, every page remembers the warmth of another's breath, every meal becomes a prayer said softly over what remains. Page 4. To read this is to walk that bridge with them, step by step, season by season, until you, too, hear the echo of love that teaches how to stay, even when someone you cherish will someday go on ahead. Page 5. The table they kept, before the empty nest. She remembered what she did not understand then, how from November onward he began to step aside, still near, still smiling, but pulling threads of himself gently away, as if teaching her how to be alone when he is gone. He laughed, he ate, he spoke as he always had, and yet there was a distance folded beneath the gestures, a quiet rehearsal for absence. Page 6. The holidays passed in their ordinary glory, Thanksgiving with its table stretched wide, Christmas with lights glittering in rooms too full of memory, New Year's marked by the fragile hope of beginnings. Through it all he stood at her side, alive, healthy, even happy, and she believed the seasons were theirs to keep. Only now does she see how each feast was also a farewell, how each smile was a laying down of burdens she could not name. Page 7. On Valentine's Day he was radiant, a man content, a man in love, a man whose laughter filled her like it had always done. She was happy too, happy in ways that felt simple and strong, as if spring itself were leaning close. And yet beneath the happiness was the truth she could not touch, that this was his last gift to her, a day without sorrow, a day of fullness before the door closed. Page 8. The morning after came like a storm without clouds, sudden and irreversible. She did not know it when she laid her head down that night, she could not have known. But looking back, she sees how he had been preparing her all along, through November's quiet withdrawals, through December's gentleness, through January's patience, until February gave her joy as the last memory to carry. He left her in love, and she holds that love still, like a bridge stretched into another season. Page 9. When their children married and drifted into their own houses of laughter, the mornings grew wide, and they learned to set a smaller table without apology. 2 cups, 2 forks, 2 faithful chairs. After Mass, they would return to their ritual breakfast, a kind of gentle binding, ham and bacon and sausage, eggs like small suns, pancakes layered like years, hash browns crisp as winter grass. Page 10. He would pour the hazelnut cream into her coffee and she watched the little galaxy swirl, then looked up at him as if he said, "I am still here, and so are you." That was when something old in them loosened and became new. They did not speak of lonely rooms or doors now closed behind grown children, instead they blessed the quiet, and in blessing it, the quiet began to bless them back. Page 11. The empty nest they did not expect. He found sorrow where she found stillness. He missed the thud of sneakers in the hall, the tug of small hands at his sleeves, the clatter and the call for seconds. He remembered his children growing up, the mornings of French toast before the bus came, syrup on their lips, backpacks ready at the door. He carried those mornings with him, and she could see it in the way he lingered over plates, how he counted chairs by memory, how the air after breakfast seemed to weigh more than before. Page 12. She learned to answer his silence with touch. A hand to his shoulder while the coffee percolated. A slice of toast cut the way they used to ask, extra butter, a little jam. Slowly, like winter yielding to a tender thaw, they united again in the middle of the house they thought they knew. It felt new because they chose it again, not for duty's sake, but because love demanded to be chosen once more. Page 13. They had written their first manual for living with children. The cries of babies, the chaos of toddlers, the tests and triumphs of young adults. And when the nest emptied, they wrote another. How to live with memory's echo, how to fill quiet rooms with kindness, how to tend to one another after tending so many others. Page 14. He gave the children lessons that were more than lessons. He taught them not to fear shadows on a screen. First with the flying monkeys of Oz, later with the dark waters of Jaws, because he wanted them to know that fear loses power when it is faced. He sat with them at the kitchen table, flashcards spread like a patient harvest, guiding them from arithmetic to algebra, from geometry into the deeper waters of numbers, because he wanted them to know the world had an order and that they were capable of mastering it. Page 15. He showed them how to drive, steady hands on the wheel, not just how to move forward but how to carry responsibility. He taught them to work, to stand on their own feet, to provide for the ones they loved, because he wanted them to know the dignity of labor. He encouraged them in sports, in music, in art, not only for skill, but for discipline, for expression, for joy. Page 16. Everything he taught was this. Truth matters, effort matters, courage matters, and love is the binding thread that makes it all endure. These were not subjects on a chalkboard but laws he lived, and he wrote them quietly into his children until they were ready to live them on their own. Page 17. The Bridge of Ordinary Sundays. He was baptized Jesuit Catholic, and she, not yet ready to stand beside him at the altar, spent that long winter in catechism. She memorized prayers by lamplight, sat in the pews through snowstorms, practiced belief until it became marrow. When Easter came, lilies lined the sanctuary, family filled the benches, and they said their vows in a church that had rung in her memory. It was the season when birdseed gave way to rice, the air sharp with laughter as it scattered over them, a beginning born of blessing. Page 18. It was the same church whose bells tolled for her mother years later, and the same bells that rang again when she carried him there in her heart, this time not as bride but as widow. Bells do not ask permission, they announce joy and grief with the same authority, tolling for both beginnings and endings as if they were one. They crossed the footbridge of Sunday with simple steps, prayer, then breakfast, then errands, then the soft and necessary chores of mercy. The rhythm of ordinary days became their liturgy, a repetition that sanctified the small and made it holy. Page 19. They spoke of their children who were no longer children, of their gardens and jobs and tired feet, of those 6 small lights who called him grandfather in voices that were themselves like bells. He kept a drawer filled with their treasures, a crayon sun, a marble, a paper crown, the household archive of a man who understood worship. At the scale of a kitchen. And when they visited, he measured pancakes by the radius of their joy, flipping each one until the edges turned like daylight under a door. The table became his altar, their laughter his hymn, and the clatter of forks a psalm he never tired of hearing. Page 20. They arrived one morning and found the cafe dimmed, chairs stacked like folded wings, the windows blurred with a thin film of yesterday. The doorway that had always opened to the smell of bacon and coffee was now sealed in silence, as if a hymn had ended mid-verse and the congregation forgotten to rise. Page 21. They pressed their faces to the glass and saw the ghost of their table inside, cups waiting, a little sugar spill glittering like frost, but no hands to lift the latch, no breath to stir the steam. Even the salt shakers stood like small sentinels left behind. He walked to the side door and found only the small sign, closed. No explanation, no farewell, just a word that ended a chapter they did not know they were finishing. It felt as if a sentence had lost its verb and could no longer move forward. They stood in the parking lot, 2 faithful chairs without their table, and the air felt emptier than hunger. Around them the town moved as if nothing had shifted, but for them the ground itself had gone hollow. It was a strange grief, to lose a place, and yet that morning they held each other's hand as if the table could be rebuilt between their palms. Page 22. But the story did not end there. They found their way to another place, the original pancake house, where the smell of batter and bacon rose to meet them at the door. She was always there, the same waitress, her smile as steady as coffee poured, her welcome the kind that wrapped around them before they even sat down. They came to love her as if she were their own, and she loved them back, calling them her second parents, saving them a table even when the crowd pressed in. They tipped her with grace because she gave them grace, week after week, a quiet devotion across plates and cups. She learned the way he liked his coffee, the way she wanted her eggs, and with her, the ritual of breakfast felt less like a substitution and more like a blessing they had not expected. Page 23. But like all loved ones, you do not replace them, you learn to live in a new way. The first cafe remained in their bones, a silence that never left them, even as kindness opened another doorway. Sometimes, when she remembered that first cafe going dark, she also remembered how light found them again in another place. Loss carried them forward, and kindness met them there, apron-clad and smiling, ready with a pot of coffee and a welcome that stitched them into another home. Page 24. Years multiplied. Clocks kept reasonable time. The house learned their two-person rhythm. They became diligent students of small comforts. He discovered how quiet could ache behind the ribs, how night could lengthen beyond the reach of lamps, how the sound of a freezer door could console as much as it could accuse. She learned the grammar of her grief, the way he would open the cookie jar and replace the lid with ceremony, the way he breathed before saying her name. Page 25. They went on tending, meals, medicine, walks when the weather allowed, and the ordinary mercies grew into a promise that neither of them would break. Yet there were signs, even then, of how the body keeps its own clock. His knees began to give out, swollen and aching in a way that warned of more than age. One day in the park he stopped mid-path, unable to go on. She helped him limp to the sidewalk, eased him down to rest on the side of a hill while she hurried back for the car. He smiled, trying to dismiss the weight of it, but she could see the pain written in his posture, in the way he pressed his hands to his knees as if to keep them from collapsing altogether. Page 26. Each moment became a quiet rehearsal, though what she did not understand, she looked into a mirror of his final days, from November to February, how little by little he had kept to himself, detaching himself from her, from the world, further and further, smiling less, as he pulled threads of himself away, always teaching her how to be alone. It was a foreshadowing drawn in flesh and bone, and still she went on, carrying meals to the table, counting pills into small cups, walking alone when the sun allowed, sharing silence when words deceased. As his strength faltered, she tended him as if tending were its own liturgy. No illness, no ache, no ending could erase. Page 27. The bridge still standing. No bridge is ever finished, it only reaches as far as the heart has learned to cross. So too with them. The years did not conclude, they unfurled, quietly, like pages left open on a table after breakfast. The coffee cooled, the light moved across the walls, and still the air held their names, not as echo, but as presence. She would sometimes catch the scent of hazelnut cream and pause, mid-motion, as though the air itself was whispering. The chair beside her, though not yet empty, would remain a part of the conversation. Grief, she thought, will be softened, not gone, never gone, but changing its posture, sitting more gently in the room. Page 28. These pages were letters she wrote, read and reread across time, recipes retold. She listened gently, as others have. She heard the hum of mass bells carried faintly through her window, as others have. For her, each small act, setting out 2 cups, tending to her garden, folding his old napkin over her knee, was a continuation, not a performance. Love has a way of shifting its weight from body to memory, and memory does learn to breathe again. When spring came each year, she let her imagination take her for a walk past that old cafe that closed one day without warning, and for a moment the windows seemed bright. She imagined the 2 of them sitting, drinking their favorite beverage, sharing parts of their meal. Their table waits, their order remembered by heart. And, in that imagining, she learned to understand that loss is not final, and it is forgiving, that nothing she cherished was ever truly lost. It had only changed its form, from time into tenderness, from presence into promise. Page 29. And so she let this bridge remain, half lit by the past, half reaching toward what was to become. There were more pages left for her to read. For now, she paused here, not at the end, but at the gentle bend where one season began to give way to another as love does. Steady as breath, she held the span between them. To be continued. Page 30. Red Cardinal Kitchen 3rd Anniversary Message. Since October 2, 2022, Red Cardinal Kitchen has celebrated its 3rd year of community. We thank you for walking beside us and keeping the hearth warm. 74.8% of our audience is subscribed, faithful voices who continue to grow with us. 25.3% of non-subscribers have been with us through nearly all 3 years, and we honor your steady presence. Page 31. As we entered into a new season, we decided to open the doors wide for subscribers only, for true engagement and shared growth. If another channel nourishes you best, or speaks more to your interests, please follow their content. Either way, may every effort you make return to you in grace. Thank you deeply for your time, your kindness, and your support, and may God bless. Red Cardinal Kitchen. All genre writing.